There are two kinds of people in the world: those who have a sense of humor and can laugh at themselves, and those who can't. And I suspect that in the comment section of this video, we shall meet some of both kinds. If you're new to my channel, hi, I'm Dara, and welcome to Magenta Otter Travels, the place where we talk about British stuff. And today, I'm going to talk to you about some British words and phrases that seem a bit funny to Americans. Some are scandalous, some are controversial, and some are just bewildering. So let me know if any of these are news to you, that they're shocking to American ears. And lest you feel like you're being picked on, Britons, I will, at the end of this video, talk about some weird things Americans say. A few that I know of, but I'm sure you have more, so feel free to join in at the end and give me additional ideas of weird things Americans say that are funny. When I was a wee teenage girl, I remember first learning that British people used some different words and phrases than what we Americans used, and some of the words they used were a bit scandalous. For example, the first one you could probably predict. I was a schoolgirl and I learned that those things that we called erasers at school, British people called them rubbers. How scandalous and naughty, because to an American, rubber just means condom. And then there's this phrase. You've probably all heard this old story. Tell me if any of you have never heard this before. The American who goes to visit the UK for the first time, and they're staying at a bed and breakfast. And as they retire for the evening, the innkeeper says to them, "When should I knock you up in the morning?" And the American says, "What?" Because, of course, to an American, being knocked up means to impregnate. It does not mean to wake someone up in the morning at a specific time. So that is, again, very confusing and scandalous. So those are ones I've known for a long time. But a few years ago, I started compiling a list on my phone of other British terms that I heard that they're not all scandalous or controversial. Some of them are just kind of funny because the implications are just different than what we say in the US. So I'm going to share those phrases that I've learned from living in the US the past 5 summers or watching far too many British TV shows. The first one I learned from the show Warren. If you guys have not seen Warren with Martin Clunes, I've talked about this before on the channel. It is such a hilarious show. And I think it's in the first episode. He talks about, well, he doesn't talk about, he does this because he's a very naughty, horrible person. He leaves litter, rubbish, waste that he's getting rid of from his house. He goes and leaves in an empty lot or by the side of the road. And it's called fly tipping. And that is a phrase that literally to an American makes no sense. Where I went to university, there was a hill with a lot of cows grazing on it, and drunk fraternity boys in the middle of the night would go up to the hill and do cow tipping, which is very cruel and horrible. And that's just tipping cows over. So when I first heard the phrase fly tipping, I imagined someone taking little flies and tipping them over. So tell me where that phrase comes from, because it's it's littering, but not littering in the sense of taking your McDonald's hamburger wrapper and throwing out of the car as you're driving down the motorway. It's leaving your rubbish by the side of the road. And oh gosh, there is a problem with this. Where were we? We were going up to some castle, like Hever Castle, I think it was. And we were in Kent, this beautiful countryside in Kent. And we could see the castle in the distance. And we're driving down some bucolic, idyllic, picturesque country road. And there's like refrigerators and all sorts of household trash that people had left on the side of the road. Ian was beside himself. He was so livid because He is definitely a litter hater, and that was just particularly heinous crime there. So yeah, tell me where the fly tipping phrase comes from, because that's that one that makes no sense at all. Here's another one. For menopausal women, when they are feeling really, really warm, like their body temperature just goes through the roof, they get hot, sweaty. In the US, we call it a hot flash, like you are just feeling this flash of extreme heat. And I believe in the UK, it's called a hot flush, which to us, a hot flush sounds like something that happens in the bathroom. I think that one is easier to understand where it has come from, because we do in the US, when someone is really overheated and they're red in the face, we say they are flushed. So it does make sense that a hot flush is just when you are flushed, but we don't call that that menopause symptom. We call it a hot flash, which kind of sounds more like a superhero. The next one is one that I don't know if I've talked about on my channel, but my good friends over at the Brit Girls have definitely talked about this one before. And that is the two different terms we have for those adorable little red bugs with black spots on their back. We call them ladybugs in the US because they are, in fact, bugs. But in Britain, they call them ladybirds. And that doesn't make sense because they are not birds. They are bugs. And Ladybird is Lady Bird Johnson from American history, a beloved former First Lady. So that's what Ladybird is to us. It is not a bug. So if you are British and you want to defend why Ladybird is a better, more logical term than ladybug, I'd love to hear about that in the comments. Okay, here is another one that is just kind of funny because it's using words that we know, but just in a way that means something totally different. If you said to an American, I'm inviting you to a fancy dress party, they would probably think, oh, I need to wear something fancy. I need to wear a cocktail dress, an evening gown, a tux. It's something really posh like you would wear to an award show in Hollywood. But I think in the UK, fancy dress party is a costume party, like for Halloween. Is it also when you would have like a masquerade ball? Let's say it's a really posh party at some manor house where they're having a ball and people are dressed in, masquerade costumes or some other type of costume. Is that a fancy dress party? As well as if just your neighbor down the street has a Halloween party and you dress up in Halloween costumes. I think that's also fancy dress, is it not? I don't know why that's fancy. I mean, dressing up like a ladybug or a ladybird or a clown or a pirate or whatever crazy things people dress up like for Halloween. I don't understand why that's fancy dress. Doesn't seem fancy to me. So again, explain that one to me in the comments. Speaking of costumes, here's another one that is just a little different, but in a funny way. What Americans wear when they go swimming at the beach and a swimming pool is a swimsuit. And because I'm a relatively old person, back in the day when I was a kid, we would also call them bathing suits. But I think it's more common these days to just call them swimsuits. But then when I was watching like period dramas and other British shows, and I would hear them referred to as a bathing costume, I'm like, oh, that sounds very elaborate. It doesn't really seem like a costume. It's just a pair of swim trunks or a little bikini or a lycra one piece. Like, doesn't really seem like a costume. So I'm wondering if that phrase came more from the Victorian era when a woman's bathing suit, a woman's swimsuit was really quite a costume. But British people, does that still seem like a relevant phrase these days? A bathing costume for the swimsuit that you would wear to the beach? Let me know. Now I'm going to talk to you about a word that I learned during one of my many castle visits. I love visiting British castles. And I learned that the name of one room was not at all what I expected it was used for. And I thought, British people make fun of us Americans for saying bathroom for a room that has no bath, or restroom for a room that you're not really going to rest in. So in the category of misleading names for rooms, I gotta say buttery was highly disappointing because I love butter. In fact, I even made an apron on my merch website that says butter makes everything better. I love butter. I live by the motto that butter makes everything better. So to learn that a buttery has nothing to do with butter, and in fact, I think that's where you would go for mead and ale or whatever they called beer back in the day when these castles were making and storing beverages for people to drink. So nothing to do with butter. And that's a funny one. And I'm sure someone or a few someones can explain to me the origin of the word buttery for that place. But every time I'm in a castle and I see that term, makes me wish I had a nice warm scone with some butter, or maybe a tea cake with butter. And now for the cannabis portion of our program. That's a phrase I never expected to say in one of my videos. But this is really funny. This is the funniest list here. So my father-in-law, of course, is English, originally grew up in Birmingham. He's a Brummie, and he immigrated to the US and went to work in Silicon Valley in Northern California. And he worked at a company for decades. And there's a funny story that's part of the family lore of when he was talking to his boss about the traditions that he had growing up. And he said, yes, our family used to have a joint every Sunday. And here they are in California, and his boss is like, what? You had what? Because of course, in the US, joint means a marijuana cigarette, a blunt. It means something that you are smoking weed in. It does not mean a cut of meat that you roast in the oven and have as part of a roast dinner. So that was a funny thing for my father-in-law to explain to his boss. The next one is something that I am very curious if Britons know how funny this is to us, because it's so commonplace for you guys, I think. I started hearing this on a TV show and some YouTube videos where people were mentioning it in passing, and I'm like, hold up, did you just say what I thought you said? And then I noticed as I was living in Britain and shopping in stores, this is a real phrase that's said all the time, and that is pot plant. In the US, a pot plant means only one thing. It means a plant that's growing cannabis. That's what it is. If you are talking about like a housewarming gift, and that's, I think, the first time I heard it, is like, oh, someone had a housewarming party and I brought them a pot plant. And I'm like, wow, I guess cannabis is very popular. So to an American, what we would call a plant that is planted in a pot is a potted plant. Never a pot plant, always a potted plant. Very tiny difference, just a couple letters, one very short syllable, but means a world of difference. And one last thing in this category, I noticed this when I was shopping at M&S last summer, and I had to take a picture, and I'm saying, one of these days I'm going to do that video about funny words, and I'm going to include this photo. Stoned fruit. That sounds like a bunch of fruit was smoking weed and got really high, and they were just stoned. We would never use that word in the US. I think I know what it means. It means fruit with pits in it, like peaches and plums and things like that. We usually call those seeds inside the fruit pits, not stones. And I don't think we really talk about that category of fruit. I was talking to Liz Bignell in a video a week or two ago about soft fruit. That's also something we don't say. We don't say soft fruit. We don't say stoned fruit. We just talk about the individual types of fruit. And, we call soft fruit we call berries. But yeah, that stoned fruit thing, that was really funny to me. And again, the connotation is very different than what a British person would think. Okay, I'm down to my last two funny British words and phrases. And this next one I have talked about before. I kind of hate bringing it up because it is a slur for a certain population of people. Back when gay just meant happy, both in the US and the UK, the word fag was used to mean cigarette. And given the fact that today it means something else, I assumed that British people wouldn't still use that word. It's not a word that we ever use in the US to mean cigarette, but it's still used by British people, and that really surprises me. So let me know if you think it's weird that British people still use it, or if you think that it's not used anymore. I have heard it recently. I think that's a bit odd, and definitely something that would be shocking to an American who is not familiar with British culture and was there. If they heard someone talking about popping out for a fag, they would be like, what? What did you just say? And another phrase that I actually really like this phrase, but I think you need to be careful about how you use it and would just be very confusing to Americans, is the phrase, away with the fairies. My husband, Ian, the poor man, I mean, let's face it, I talk a lot and we're together 24/7, 365. So the poor guy has to listen to a lot of yammering. I'm always on about something. And so you can imagine that he frequently takes little mental breaks while I'm rambling on about something to be in another world, daydreaming or thinking his own thoughts. And when he is doing that, I could say he's away with the fairies. But if I said to an American friend, my husband right now, he's away with the fairies, they would think something very different. And that would be weird and that would be funny. So it's really a lovely phrase, but only if you know what it means. Okay, now let's pick on Americans. We know that restroom is not a place where you rest. And we know that bathrooms are called bathrooms by Americans even if there is no bathtub. But the thing that's even funnier is that we call a half bath, which is a room that has just a toilet and a sink, we call that a powder room. And that, of course, is an archaic term from when women would euphemistically say, I need to go powder my nose. But I don't know why we still call them powder rooms. Probably for the same reason that y'all call powder rooms cloak rooms. Doesn't make any sense, but we both have just nonsense names for those water closets. Another crazy thing Americans say is we call gasoline gas. So we're calling something that's a liquid gas, which is silly because we all learned in science class in school that a liquid and a gas are two different things. So it really makes no sense that we Americans call something gas that isn't. This next one came up when I did a shopping video. And I was talking about grocery stores, which is a term that we use in the US. And one person got their knickers in a knot, their knickers in a twist, their undies in a bunch, and gave me a talking to about the fact that the term grocery store made no sense. This thing Americans say makes no sense. And I am not sure why, so please explain that to me. I think it's because grocery, just the word grocery, means a shop where you buy groceries. So is grocery store redundant because grocery already means grocery store and then you're saying the word store at the end of it? Is that the issue? What other things do Americans say that are just funny, silly, scandalous, controversial, or just nonsensical? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please check out some of my other language videos in the description and do something good in the world today.